Nobody in that house had learned her name in 7 years. To them, she was only the heavy girl who scrubbed the floors, the one you stepped around like furniture. So when Lazaro Vale, the most feared man in the city, dropped dead at his own engagement dinner, and 3 doctors bent over him and then straightened up and shook their heads, no one thought to look at the maid still kneeling in the corner. They had already drawn the sheet to his chin, they had already called him gone, but she had seen the one thing every trained man in that room had missed. And through the long freezing night, while everyone who mattered turned and walked away, she was the only one who would not let go. The Vale House did not sit on its hill so much as loom over it, a great, pale stone thing with windows tall enough to swallow a person whole. Lynette had washed every one of those windows more times than she could count, and not one of them had ever shown her a reflection that anybody bothered to look at twice. That suited her. A woman built the way Lynette was built learned early that being looked at was rarely a kindness. She was broad and soft and slow on the stairs, and she had long ago made her peace with the small daily cruelties of a house full of thin, hard people. Let them step around her. Let them talk straight over her head as though the polishing cloth in her hand did the work on its own. Invisibility, she had figured out a long time ago, was its own quiet kind of power. You could stand in a corner with a dust rag and watch a family show you exactly who they were, because no one ever bothers to perform for the furniture, and this family had shown her a great deal. She knew that the housekeeper skimmed from the grocery money. She knew which guard wept in the pantry after phone calls with his mother. She knew that the beautiful woman, about to marry the master of the house, did not love him, because Lynette had watched Ondine practice her softness in the hallway mirror before walking into a room, the way an actress runs her lines. Love does not need rehearsal, only performance does. There were other things, too, that did not fit if you were the kind of person no one watched. In the last month, new men had begun to appear at the gate, quiet men in good coats who did not laugh at the old guard's jokes and did not seem to answer to anyone Lynette recognized. The locks on the wine cellar and the study had been changed on a Tuesday by a locksmith who came alone and left no bill. Ondine's people, the guards muttered and shrugged, because a bride brings her own household. Everyone knew that. But Lynette swept those hallways at 6 every morning, and she had begun to notice how the new men went quiet when she passed, then picked their talk back up once the heavy girl and her bucket were safely by. Silence around the furniture. That was new. Furniture is not supposed to be worth going quiet for. Lynette had learned to read people the same way she had learned to read a failing body, by watching what no one else thought worth watching. 12 years she had spent nursing her mother through a sickness that took her one slow inch at a time. 12 years of counting breaths in the dark, of learning the exact color a person turns in the last week, the last day, the last hour. When the money for real nurses ran out, Lynette had become the nurse. By the end, she could tell from across a room whether her mother would eat that day. A body talks, if you have nothing better to do than listen. Lynette had never had anything better to do, which was why she had noticed, 3 weeks ago now, that something was wrong with Lazaro Vale. It was small. It was the kind of thing you would only catch if you spent your days invisible and close. His hand had begun to tremble faintly when he lifted his cup, a fine flutter he hid by setting the cup down fast. His color had gone the wrong sort of gray underneath the tan, a gray she knew, a gray she did not like. Twice she had watched him grip the banister on the stairs. He had run up lightly for 7 years, and there was a smell on his breath in the mornings, faint and sweetish and chemical, that reminded her of nothing good. Once she had caught the same smell clinging to the rim of his cup after she had already washed it twice. She knew that smell. She could not place it, and not being able to place it frightened her more than anything, had frightened her in years. She had almost said something. Once, only once, she had stood in his study with the coffee tray and felt the words climb into her throat. "Sir, you are not well," And it is not the kind of not well you think. But who was she to tell Lazaro Vale anything? She was the heavy girl who cleaned the floors. She set the tray down and left, and hated herself on the stairs. He had said her name once. That was the strange thing she carried around like a stone in her pocket. Everyone else in that house called her girl, or worse, called her by the name of the maid who had worked there before her and quit, so that for years she had answered to a dead woman's name without ever correcting anyone. But 2 winters back, on the night his father died, Lazaro had come down to the cold kitchen at 4 in the morning and found her scrubbing a pot that was already clean because she had not known what else to do with her hands. He had stood in the doorway a long time. Then he had said, "Thank you, Lynette." Just that, her actual name, said correctly, by the one man in the world everyone else was afraid of. She had not slept that night. She had lain awake turning it over, furious at herself for how much it had meant that a man should know she existed. So she watched him. Of course, she watched him. And in the 3 weeks since his color had started to turn, she had watched harder, and what she had seen had begun to stack up into a shape she did not want to name. The engagement dinner was set for a Thursday. The whole house had been polished to a hard shine, the long table dressed in white and silver, the wine brought up from the cellar in cases. Ondine drifted through it all in pale gray silk, checking flowers, checking place cards, checking her own softness in every mirror she passed. A merger, the guards called it, when they thought no one could hear, and they were not wrong. 2 families joined by a marriage, 2 territories that would stop bleeding each other and start counting the money instead. Everyone said it was the smartest thing Lazaro had ever done. Lynette was carrying a stack of clean linen down the service hall an hour before the guests arrived, when she heard Ondine's voice through the half-open door of the small sitting room, low and quick and entirely without its usual practiced softness. "He looks worse tonight," Ondine was saying. "Are you certain about the timing?" And a man's voice, one Lynette could not quite place, answered her, calm as still water. "I tonight, it will look like his heart." No one questions a heart. Lynette stood in the hall with the linen going cold in her arms, and did not breathe, and understood at last exactly what that sweetish chemical smell had been. She had no plan. That was the thing she would think about later. In the long night that she had done everything that came after, with no plan at all, only the certainty pushing up through her chest, like a second heartbeat that she could not stand in that hallway and let it happen. She did not go to the guards. Half of them answered to men she did not trust, and she had no proof, beyond a smell and a sentence, overheard through a door, and who in that house would take the word of the heavy girl over the word of the bride. She did not go to Lazaro either. There was no version of walking up to him an hour before his own engagement and saying, "Your wife means to poison you tonight." That did not end with her thrown out the gate. So she did the only thing a woman like her could do. She stayed close, and she watched his cup. She could not get to all of them. That was what undid her. The dinner was a crush of 40 guests and a dozen glasses, passing on trays she was not permitted to touch, and she could not hover at his elbow without someone asking what the maid thought she was doing at the master's chair. She caught one glass. She spilled it on purpose, clumsy fat fingers. "So sorry, sir," and took the blow of Ondine's glare and went to fetch a cloth. And when she knelt to blot the spill, she palmed the emptied glass and slipped it deep into her apron pocket, because even then, before she understood the half of it, some watching part of her wanted to keep the proof. But there were other glasses. There was the toast. And halfway through the toast, with his own wife smiling up at him and the whole long table raising crystal in his name, Lazaro Vale set his hand flat on the white cloth and frowned as though he had forgotten something, and went down. The sound a strong man makes when he falls is not like anything else. The table screamed. Chairs went over. And then the doctors came, because a man like Lazaro keeps doctors, the way other men keep dogs, and 3 of them worked over him on the dining room floor, among the fallen silver, while 40 guests pressed back against the walls. Lynette watched from the corner with a cloth still in her hand. She watched them press on his chest and put their lights in his eyes and their fingers to his throat. She watched the oldest of them, the family man, Dr. Aldous, kneel back on his heels far too soon, she thought. Far too soon. And she heard him say the words in a voice pitched for the room. His heart. There is nothing to be done. He is gone. And the strangest thing happened then. The room did not fall apart. Ondine put a hand to her mouth in a gesture so clean it could have been drawn with a ruler, and somewhere a man she could not see said, quietly, "See to the arrangements, in the tone you use for a delivery that has arrived on schedule." They had been ready. That was the thing Lynette could not get past, even in the middle of it. A great man had just died at his own table, and the people closest to him were not shattered. They were relieved. They were on time. They drew a tablecloth up over his face and left him on the floor of his own dining room. And one by one, the important people filed out to the drawing room to make their calls, and the doctors packed their bags. And within the hour the house had emptied of everyone who mattered, and no one at all had thought to send away the maid. So Lynette crossed the room and knelt down on the floor beside a dead man, and lifted the cloth off his face, because she had spent 12 years learning what the dead truly look like, and something about this was wrong. His color was terrible, but it was not the color of the dead. She had washed her mother's body with her own hands, and she knew the difference between a face the blood has left for good, and a face the blood has only mostly left. She put 2 fingers to the side of his throat the way she had been taught by no one, the way she had learned in the dark over 12 years, and she waited, and she counted, and she felt nothing, 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 and then, so slow it was, almost not there at all, so slow a doctor listening for a normal heart would swear the man was gone, she felt it. 1 beat. She counted in the silence of the empty dining room. She reached 50 before the next one came. He was not dead. Whatever was in him had slowed him down to the very floor of life, had walked him right up to the edge, and left him balanced there, and every trained man in that house had glanced at the edge and called it the fall. But she had counted her mother's heart down to almost nothing, and back more nights than she could bear to remember, and she knew a body clinging on when she felt one. Lynette Vale, she thought wildly. Then, no, just Lynette. Only Lynette. The heavy girl nobody could name, kneeling alone over the man the whole city feared, with his killers 1 room away, and calling for the undertaker. She could walk out the gate right now, and be nobody in some other city by morning. Instead, she took his cold hand in both of her warm ones, and bent close to his gray ear, and whispered the only true thing she had. "I know you are still in there, and I am not going anywhere." The first thing was that she could not leave him on the floor. Someone would come back. They always came back in a house like this, with their forms and their vans and their quiet, efficient men, and when they came, they would carry the body away, and whatever slow ember was still burning down inside him would go out in the back of a cold vehicle, among strangers who had been paid not to look too hard. The word the calm man had used behind the door came back to her. Arrangements. She had cleaned up after enough of this family's arrangements to know the word meant a thing done neatly and never spoken of again. So the body could not be here when they came. The body had to become no body at all. She did not let herself think past that. Thinking past, it was how you froze. Her mother had taught her that without ever meaning to. In the long years of lifting and turning and carrying a grown woman who could no longer carry herself, you did the next small thing, and then the small thing after that, and you did not lift your eyes to the whole mountain, or your legs would refuse the first step. The next small thing was the door at the end of the scullery. Everyone in the house had forgotten the old still room. It sat past the kitchens, down 3 shallow steps, a cold square room that had once been used for drying herbs and keeping preserves, back when great houses did such things. Now it held broken chairs and a dead refrigerator and the spare mops that Lynette alone ever came for. It had a heavy door and a working bolt on the inside, and no window, and not one person who mattered in that house had walked through it in all her 7 years. If you wanted to hide a thing in the Vale house, you hid it in plain sight. Among the people no one saw, in the rooms no one entered, behind the doors that only the furniture knew. Getting him there was the part that would have stopped anyone else. Lazaro Vale was a big man, heavy with muscle, gone slack, and the dead weight of him was a thing Lynette felt in her spine the moment she tried the first lift. A thin woman could not have done it. A strong man in a panic would have hurt him worse, hauling and dropping. But Lynette had spent 12 years learning the patient physics of moving a body that cannot help you move it, and for once in her whole life, her body was exactly the right body for the task in front of her. She was broad through the shoulders, she was low and steady on her feet. All the softness the world had spent its life stepping around turned out to be strength that had simply never been asked for anything before. She rolled him onto the fallen tablecloth. She wrapped it under his arms. And she dragged him, slow foot by slow foot, across the marble, out of the ruined dining room, and down the dark service hall, stopping every few yards to press 2 fingers to his throat and find the far, faint beat, still there, still, 50 counts apart. Twice she heard footsteps somewhere in the great house above, and twice she lay down flat on the floor beside him in the dark and became what she had always been. A shape not worth a second glance, until the steps moved off. Once a man crossed the far end of the hall, carrying a folded stretcher, one of the quiet new men, and Lynette stopped breathing entirely and watched him pass without once turning his head toward the servants' passage. Why would he? There was nothing down there but the maid. The worst of it came at the mouth of the scullery. She had him halfway through the low doorway when a light snapped on in the kitchen beyond, hard and yellow, and she heard the fridge door open and the clink of a bottle. One of the new men, helping himself, a stride and a half from where she crouched over the master of the house in the dark. She did not breathe. She did not pray. She simply lowered herself over Lazaro until her cheek lay against his cold hair and became a heap of blankets and laundry in an unlit doorway. The most ordinary thing in the world, beneath notice, beneath suspicion, beneath even curiosity. The man drank his water, the man turned off the light and went away, and Lynette learned that the same thing which had made her whole life smaller had just made it possible to save a life that was not her own. She got him down the 3 steps one at a time, cradling his skull so it would not crack against the stone, and through the heavy door, and she shot the bolt behind them, and only then, in the black cold of the forgotten still room, did her hands finally begin to shake. She could not risk a light that might show under the door. She worked by the thin gray seep of it from the hall, dragging down the moth-eaten blankets that had wrapped the broken furniture for years, building a nest of them on the cold flagstone floor. The room was freezing, and cold was the enemy. Now a body slowed to the floor of life cannot make its own heat. She had watched her mother go blue with the fingers in a warm room. This room was not warm. So Lynette did the only thing left to a woman, with no medicine and no help and no name. She lay down on the hard floor beside the man an entire city was afraid of, and she pulled the blankets over the both of them, and she gathered his cold, heavy body against the whole warm bulk of hers, and she held on. His heart was so slow against her ribs that she had to hold her own breath to feel it. She pressed her palm flat over the center of his chest and counted, and somewhere past 30 a beat would come, and she would let herself breathe again, and then she would count once more. The dark pressed in. Far above her, faint through the stone, she heard an engine turn over in the courtyard and pull away, and then the house went quiet in a way she had never once heard it in 7 years. The quiet of a place that believes its master is dead. She had no plan for the morning. She had no plan for the hour. She had a cold room and a bolted door, and the heat of her own body and the count she had learned at her mother's bedside, and she gave him all 4 of them, and she waited to see which would run out first. People think the dying cannot hear them. It is one of the great kind lies the living tell themselves. so that they can talk over a bed as though the person in it has already left. Lynette knew better. She had learned better in a narrow room over 12 years, from a mother who could no longer answer, but whose face, if you watched it the way Lynette had learned to watch, still changed at the sound of a voice she loved. Hearing is the last thing to go. Her mother had told her that once, early on, when she could still tell her things, whatever else leaves them, she had said, they can still hear you. So talk to me, Lynette, even at the end, especially at the end. So Lynette talked to him. She did not plan to. It began as a way to keep herself awake through the deep middle of the night when the cold had crept into her hips and her eyes kept trying to close, and she was terrified that if she slept, she would wake to a body gone still and cool in her arms. She started with nonsense: the weather, the state of the floors, the price of the flowers Undine had wasted on a dinner meant to end in a funeral. But nonsense will not hold a tired woman in the dark, and slowly, without deciding to, she began to tell him true things instead. She told him about her mother, about the 12 years, about the little flat above the laundrette where the heat never worked right, and how she had learned to bank her own warmth around a failing body because there had been no money for anything better. She told them how she had once, a long time ago, wanted to train as a nurse, how she had sat the entrance papers twice and passed them both times, and how both times the money had gone instead to the medicine and the rent and the slow, expensive business of keeping her mother alive one more month. She told him she did not resent it. That was the strange part. She said into the dark, into his cold ear. People always expected her to resent it, and she never had. She had gotten to keep her mother 12 years longer than the doctors swore was possible. What was a life spent, if that was what you spent it on? She told him things she had never said to a living soul, because he was not, in that hour, quite among the living, and it is easy to be honest with a man who cannot use it against you. She told him that no one had held her since her mother died. That was the plain shape of it. 7 years she had lived in this house and moved through it like weather, and in all that time, not one person had so much as taken her hand. She had not known how much she missed it until tonight, when she had her arms full of a dying man and understood that the warmth was going both ways, that she was as starved for this as he was, that holding on to him was the first time in years she had been of use to anyone who might still live. It shamed her a little to take comfort from a catastrophe. She told him that too. She suspected he would understand. A man does not build what he had built without learning how to be lonely in a house full of people. She told him she was sorry. That was the one that broke her voice. She told him she had known. 3 weeks she had known something was wrong with him, had smelled it on his breath, and seen it in his hands, and watched it drag the color out of his face, and she had said nothing, because she was the heavy girl who cleaned the floors, and who was she to tell Lazaro Vale that he was being murdered by inches at his own table? If I had spoken, she said, you would be upstairs asleep in your own bed and whole. I let them do this to you, because I was afraid of looking foolish. I have spent my whole life being invisible on purpose, because it was safer, and tonight, my safety nearly killed you. In the dark, with nothing left to do but hold on and talk, she finally let herself lay the pieces out, end to end the way she had never dared to in the bright bustle of the house. The sweetish smell on his breath for 3 weeks. The same smell clinging to a cup she had washed twice. The trembling hand, the gray creeping in under his collar, the strength going out of a man who had never once needed to reach for a banister before in his life. That was not an illness. Illness came the way her mother's had come, on its own cruel schedule, indifferent to everyone. This had a schedule too, but the schedule belonged to a person. Someone had been feeding it to him a little at a time, patient as a gardener, and then tonight, in front of 40 witnesses and 3 doctors, they had given him the rest. No one questions a heart. She heard the calm voice through the sitting-room door again, and this time she let herself hear the thing she had been too frightened to hear. The first time it had not been a stranger's voice. It had been a voice from inside the house, a voice he knew, a voice he had trusted with his back turned. Everyone he trusted had been in on the burying of him, and the only one left awake at his side was the one nobody had ever thought worth the trouble of counting. Once, while she talked, she thought she caught a wet gleam at the corner of his closed eye. Catching the thin gray light from under the door, she wiped it away with her thumb and told herself it was nothing. The eyes of the dead weep sometimes. She had seen it before. It meant nothing. She made herself believe that, because the other thing it might mean was too much to lay on top of everything she was already carrying. She did not expect an answer. "You do not talk to the dying," to be answered. Which was why, when his hand moved, she nearly screamed. It was the smallest thing. Under the blankets, where her right hand lay laced through his cold fingers, his fingers closed. Not a twitch. Not the random misfire of a dying nerve. She had felt every kind of involuntary movement a failing body makes, and this was none of them. This was slow and deliberate, and it was a hand answering a hand. His fingers tightened around hers, once, with the whole faint remainder of his strength, and then went slack again. Lynette lay very still in the dark, and understood a thing so terrible she could hardly hold it. He was in there. He had been in there the whole time. Whatever had been done to him had not switched him off like a lamp. It had locked him inside a body that could not move or speak or open its eyes, and left him there, awake, in the dark, while 3 doctors called him dead, over the top of him, and his own bride put a rehearsed hand to her mouth and walked out to make her calls. He had heard Dr. Aldous say there was nothing to be done. He had heard them pull the cloth across his face. He had lain on the floor of his own dining room, alive and screaming somewhere with no way to make a sound, while the people he trusted stepped over him and left. And then a woman, whose name he had said exactly once in 7 years, had knelt down beside him and lifted the cloth and taken his cold hand in her warm ones, and told him she knew he was still in there and that she was not going anywhere. He had heard that too. Something moved in Lynette's chest then that had never moved there before, not in all her careful invisible years. It was rage, clean and cold and total. She had spent a lifetime swallowing every unfairness handed to her, had made an art of not minding, of being too soft and too slow and too unseen to be worth anyone's defending. But this was not hers to swallow. They had left him awake in the dark to die. They had made him lie there and listen to it, to the doctors and the cloth and the calm, unhurried voices of the people he had built his whole guarded life around. Whatever the morning brought, whatever it cost, the heavy girl nobody could name, the people who had done that were going to answer for it. She did not know yet how. She only knew, with the same certainty that had lifted her up out of that hallway hours before, that they would. Lynette turned in the nest of blankets so that she could get her arm properly around him, so that as much of her warmth as could reach him did, and she put her mouth close to his ear, and this time she did not talk to fill the silence. This time she talked to a man who could hear her. "I felt that," she said. "I know you can hear me. So, you listen to me now, Lazaro Vale, because I am only going to promise this the once. I am not one of them. I am not clever, and I am not armed, and there is no one in this house who will lift a finger for either of us. But I have sat a longer night than this at a harder bedside, and I did not lose that one until it was truly the end, and I am telling you, it is not your end. Not tonight, not while I am holding on. You have been carrying this whole house on your back for years, and every soul in it walked out on you in an hour. Well, the furniture stayed. Do you hear me? The furniture stayed, and the furniture is stronger than it looks." She talked him through the worst part of the night. That way, when his breathing snagged and stopped, she breathed for him, her mouth over his, slow, careful lungfuls, until it caught again on its own. When the cold reached too deep, and a fine trembling started in him, that frightened her more than the stillness had, she wrapped herself tighter and rubbed the warmth back into his hands and his arms, and told him about the summers of her childhood, She counted his heart down, and she counted it back, 40 counts apart, then 30, somewhere in the blackest hour, 20. The ember was not going out. She was feeding it with the only fuel she had, which was her own stubborn refusal, and slowly, slowly, it was catching. There was a moment, in the very pit of the night, when she almost lost herself instead of him. Her own eyes kept sliding shut, her arms had gone past aching into a dull nothing, and the warm dark and the slow rhythm of his breathing were a lullaby pulling her down toward a sleep she knew she must not take. If she slept, the cold would come creeping back into him while she dreamed, and she would wake with the ember gone out and never once forgive herself for the rest of her days. So she did the cruel thing. She dug her own nails into her own palm until it stung, and bit the soft inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, and made herself sit up in the freezing black and keep her hands moving over him, chafing the warmth back into his arms, his chest, his cold face, talking the whole time. Because the sound of her own voice was the rope she was using to haul the two of them back up out of the deep water. She had done this before, she kept reminding herself of it. She had sat the longest night of her life once already, in a narrow flat above a laundrette, and she had not let go of that hand until it was truly, gently, the end. This hand was not there yet. Not nearly. She lost track of time. There was no light to mark it by. There was only the count, and the warmth, and the low, steady murmur of her own voice, telling a dead man he was not allowed to be dead, until at last, when she had talked herself hoarse, and her whole body ached from holding him, and she was so tired the dark had begun to swim, she felt him draw a breath that was different from all the others. Deeper. His own. A breath a body takes when it has decided somewhere, below all thought, to stay. And on the ragged edge of that breath, so faint she felt it against her cheek more than heard it, Lazaro Vale said the first word he had spoken since he fell. He said her name, not girl, not the dead maid's name she had answered to for years. He said, Linnet, cracked and broken and barely a breath at all, but her own name, correct. The second time in 7 years and the only time that had ever mattered. She was still crying over that one small sound, her forehead pressed to his, when she heard it. Out in the courtyard, faint through 3 walls and a bolted door, the crunch of tires on gravel, and the low double slam of van doors, and men's voices in the gray before dawn. They had come for the body. Linnet went cold, in a way, the room had nothing to do with. She lifted her head and made herself think the Count first. Always the Count. His heart came steadier, now, quicker, a living rhythm she could catch without holding her breath. But he was still a man who could not lift his own hand, let alone run. If the collectors came looking, if they opened this door, there was nothing she could do to stop them, and nowhere left to drag him. She had bought him a night. She was not sure she could buy him an hour of daylight. Footsteps came down into the servants' passage. More than one man. The wheels of a stretcher, that same soft rattle she had heard in the hall. She heard them go into the dining room first, heard the pause, heard a low, confused voice say, "He is not here," and another answer it, "He has to be here." They left him on the floor. She heard the search begin. Lazaro's fingers found her wrist and closed. He was trying to tell her something. His lips moved, and no sound came, and she bent close, and on the third try she caught the shape of it. Under the breath, one word. Aldous. She did not understand. Then a key turned in the still room door. She had bolted it from the inside, but a bolt is only wood and a screw, and the man on the other side did not batter it or shout. He simply worked at it, patient and quiet, and after a moment the old bolt gave with a small, tired sound, and the heavy door swung inward on the gray light of the hall, and Dr. Aldous stood in the gap with a key in one hand and a black leather bag in the other, looking down at the two of them in their nest of ruined blankets on the floor. For a long moment, nobody moved. Linnet had put herself over Lazaro without deciding to. all of her between him and the door, her chin up, ready to be struck. The old doctor took in the whole of it, the blankets, and the slow, unmistakable rise and fall of a chest he had knelt beside 8 hours before and pronounced still forever. His face did something complicated and terrible. Lynette had spent her life reading faces, and she read this one clean through. It was not the face of a man discovering a problem, it was the face of a man discovering that the thing he had feared he had done, he had not quite managed to do. "You kept him warm," Aldous said. His voice was not the smooth voice he had used for the room. It shook. "That is why. Dear God, you kept him warm, and you kept him breathing, and you brought his heart back up. I have practiced medicine for 40 years, and I could not have told you that would work, and you did it on a stone floor, with a horse blanket." "I counted," Lynette said, because she did not know what else to say, and because she did not yet know if the man in the doorway meant to save them or finish them. "I count. It is the only thing I know how to do." Aldous stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind him, and knelt, old knees cracking, and did not reach for Lazaro's throat but for Lynette's eyes holding them. "Listen to me. Because we have almost no time and I owe you the truth, even if it is the last thing I do with my life. I knew. When I knelt back in that room and said there was nothing to be done, I already suspected what it was. There is a poison, an old one, distilled from a plant, that slows a man until the finest doctor alive will swear he is gone. Give a little every day, and the heart grows weak and no one blinks. Give the last of it all at once, and the man falls at his own table, and every physician in the room signs the certificate without a second thought. I have seen it exactly once before, 30 years ago, and I have prayed my whole life I would never see it again." Then why, Lynette started, and could not finish, because the why was too large. "Because they showed me my grandchildren's school," Aldous said simply. "In a photograph, that is all it takes. At the end of a long life. They did not even have to say the words. I signed what they told me to sign, and I went home, and I sat in the dark, and I could not do it. I came back to move the body myself, before the others could, on the chance, the mad chance, that a little warmth, and a little time." He stopped. He looked at Lazaro, breathing on the floor, kept alive by a housemaid who had done by instinct and love what he had been too frightened to attempt with all his training. "And I find that a woman none of them ever bothered to look at has already done the thing I did not dare to hope for." Lynette believed him. She had read too many faces in her life to be fooled by this one, and the grief in it was the real thing, the particular grief of a decent man who has learned, too late and near the end of his years, exactly how small a price it takes to buy his silence. She did not forgive him. There was no time to forgive anyone, and forgiveness was not hers to hand out on Lazaro's behalf. But she saw that he was theirs, now, hers and Lazaro's, bound to them by the same thread that had bound him to the killers, which was that he could not go on living with what he had almost let himself do. A frightened man who is finally chosen is the most useful ally in the world. She knew that better than anyone. She had been a frightened woman who finally chose, only hours before, and look what that had already been worth. Out in the passage, close now, a voice called down the stone. "Doctor, the van is waiting. Have you found him?" Aldous' eyes locked on Lynette's. She saw the question in them, and she gave him her answer without a word. All of her weight still between the door and the man on the floor. "Whatever you are," she thought at him, "choose now. Choose in front of me." The old man rose and turned and set his shoulders, and when he spoke through the closed door his voice had gone smooth again. The voice for the room. The voice that had lied so easily 8 hours before. "The body is here, but there is a difficulty with it, and it is not one for the young men. Tell Mr. Renzo he had better come down himself." He turned back to Lynette and dropped his voice to almost nothing and said, "That buys us minutes, no more. The man who is coming is the one who arranged all of it. And when he opens that door, Everything the three of us do next has to already be decided. Renzo Linnet said, tasting the name. Lazzaro's own second. Sa. The man who stood at his shoulder in every photograph on the study wall, who carried a key to every room, who could change the locks and hire the quiet men and walk a poison into a guarded house because not one soul in it would ever think to watch the master's right hand. Of course it was him. It was always the one they trusted. It was always the shoulder a man never thought to guard. And below her, at that Lazzaro's, fingers closed hard around her wrist, and she looked down and saw that his eyes had come open, at last, dark and fever-bright, and burning with a fury that was the twin of her own. He could not yet lift his head from the blankets, but he was awake, and he was listening, and he had just heard the name of the man who had buried him alive while he still breathed. Whatever came through that door in the next few minutes, it would not find the helpless dead thing it was expecting to collect. It would find the three of them waiting. And two of the three had already decided, somewhere in that long and freezing night, that they had nothing left in the world to lose. They had the length of a slow walk down a stone passage to decide how three people who could barely stand were going to take a man who had just murdered his own master and gotten away with it. What they had between them would not have frightened a child. Aldous had his bag, and in it a syringe and a vial of something that could put a large man to sleep if it reached him before he reached them. Linnet had her hands and her weight, and the years of quiet study no one had ever thought to fear. And Lazzaro had nothing at all, which was the cruelest joke the night had played. That the man who had frightened an entire city now lay on a heap of blankets, unable to lift his own head, forced to set his life a second time in the hands of a servant and a frightened old man. She saw what that cost him. She saw it, in the fury behind his eyes, the raw humiliation of a man who had built his life around, making certain he would never need saving, learning in a single night that he had needed it all along and simply never been given it. Later she thought there would be time to teach him that needing someone was not the same as being weak, if there was a later. It was Linnet who saw the shape of it first, because seeing the shape of things while nobody watched her was the one gift her whole small life had given her. Renzo was not coming down to a fight. He was coming down to a problem, a delicate mess a frightened old doctor wanted handled away from the young men. He would come in expecting a corpse with a complication and a servant he need not so much as glance at. He would come in careless, and a careless man, she knew, was the only kind three broken people had any hope against. So do not give him a fight, she whispered, fast and low, kneeling between the two men. Give him what he expects. Doctor, you stand there, wringing your hands, exactly the coward he already thinks you are. I will be nothing, in the corner, the way I have always been nothing. And you, she said, turning to Lazzaro, whose eyes tracked her now with a terrible burning focus, above lips that could shape only the smallest sounds. You do the hardest thing of all. You lie still. You be dead. You let him stand over you and gloat, because a man like that will not be able to help himself, and every word he says with his guard down is a word that saves your house. Can you do that? Can you play dead for the man who tried to make you dead, for real? Lazzaro's jaw worked. The sound that came out was cracked and furious and barely there, but she heard it. For you, he breathed. She did not have time to feel what that did to her chest. She pressed the poisoned glass she had carried in her apron all night, the one she had never let go of, into Aldous' shaking hands. Proof, she said. Whatever happens, that glass keeps him hanging. And then the footsteps were at the door, unhurried, sure of themselves, and Linnet folded herself down into the corner among the mops and the broken chairs and became, one final time, a thing not worth a second look. Renzo came in the way. Powerful men come into rooms they own. He was younger than Linnet had expected, the arranger of all this to be, elegant in a dark coat, with the easy, handsome face of a man who had never once in his life been made to wait. He did not look at her. He looked at the body on the blankets and at Aldous twisting his old hands, and his mouth curved. "Doctor," he said, "you called me down to a laundry room to look at a dead man. This had better be very good." "He is not entirely dead," Aldous quavered, and it was such a perfect performance of terror that Lynette nearly believed it herself. The dose! It was not enough. His heart! It will not stop. I have been down here an hour and it will not stop. And if the collectors find a warm body in that van— Renzo crossed the room and crouched by Lazaro and looked into the slack gray face of the man he had served for years, and he laughed. Softly, fondly, the way you laugh at a dog that will not give up a stick. "Stubborn to the last," he said. "You were always stubborn, Lazaro. It is what made you strong, and it is what made you stupid. You built a wall around this house a mile high, and you never once thought to look at the man standing inside it, beside you. 7 years. I carried your bags and opened your doors and let you call me your brother, and you never saw me at all." He reached down and patted Lazaro's cold cheek, twice, almost tender. "By noon, the families will kiss Undine's hand and mine, and by spring, no one will remember your name. It is not personal, old friend. It is only that you were in the chair, and I wanted the chair." He straightened and stretched, and glanced at his watch, and the casualness of it was the most obscene thing Lynette had ever seen. "In a few hours the families come," he went on, more to himself now than to the trembling doctor, a man in love with the sound of his own cleverness. "They come to bury you, and they will leave, having crowned me. Undine plays the widow. I play the faithful steward, who will guard her interests and yours. And by the time anyone thinks to wonder how a man so strong fell so fast, the certificate is signed, the body is ash, and the question goes up the chimney with the smoke. Her father brings his ports, I bring your name and your ships, and the 2 houses that spent 30 years bleeding each other. White wake up one morning belonging to me." He nudged Lazaro's slack arm with the toe of his shoe. "You spent your whole life making yourself impossible to kill from the outside, brother. You never once thought to bolt the door on the inside. Every man in that courtyard answers to me now. Every lock in this house turns for my key. The only thing left of your reign is a warm body that will not take the hint, and I am about to see to that myself." There, Lynette thought, that was all of it. That was the whole confession, given freely to a room he thought held nothing but a corpse, a coward, and a cleaner. Now, she had learned patience at a bedside, and she had learned it in a house full of people who never watched her, and she spent all of it in the half-second it took Renzo to lean down and reach for the pillow. He meant to press over a face that would not stop breathing. Aldous moved, on the word they had agreed, fumbling forward with his bag as if to help, and Renzo's eyes flicked to the old man in contempt. And in that flick, in that one careless heartbeat, when the most dangerous man in the house was looking at the least, Lynette came up out of the corner. She did not fight like the men in this house fought. She had never been taught. She simply brought the whole of herself, all the weight and softness the world had spent its life mocking, down onto Renzo's back and bore him to the stone floor, the way she would bear down a thrashing patient in a fit, with her full mass and her low center and her broad, strong arms. And she pinned him there by main force, while he bucked and swore in pure disbelief that the furniture had hands. Aldous' needle found the side of his neck. The old doctor's thumb drove the plunger home. And Lazaro Vale, with the last coin of strength in his poisoned body, rolled his head to the side and looked his brother in the eye and let him watch the dead man watch him go under. Renzo's struggles slowed. His eyes went wide, then vague, then closed. Whatever Aldous had put in him would hold him for hours. Lynette stayed sprawled across him a moment longer, panting, shaking, astonished at her own body. Then she rolled off and pressed her fingers to Lazaro's throat without even thinking. The Count, always the Count, and found it holding, and only then let herself breathe. "You are heavier than you look," Aldous said faintly. To no one. To the room. And it was so absurd that a sound came out of Lynette that was half a sob and half a laugh. But there was no time for either. They bound Renzo with the cords off the old blankets and gagged him and left him breathing in the corner where the mops had been. And then the three of them faced the thing that could not be talked around. The men in the courtyard were Renzo's. The van was Renzo's. Somewhere above them, a house full of guards was waiting for a signal, and they did not know which of those guards still belonged to Lazaro, and which had been quietly bought, and to guess wrong even once was to die. It was a problem with no good answer, and almost no time to solve it. They could not carry a helpless man past a courtyard full of Renzo's people. They could not simply wait, because in a few short hours, the families would arrive and the lie would harden into law. And a lie, the families had already knelt to, was a thing not even a living Lazaro could easily undo. They needed one loyal man inside these walls. Just one. And they needed him tonight, and they had no way on earth to know which of the armed strangers moving through the house above still belonged to the master bound and breathing on a laundry floor. "I know one," Lynette said. They both looked at her. "There is a guard," she said. "Merrick, big man, keeps to himself. 3 months ago I found him crying in the pantry in the middle of the night, and when I asked he told me his mother was dying across the sea, and he could not go to her. I have watched that man for 7 years pick up spiders in his hands and put them out the window rather than step on them. He is not one of Renzo's cold ones. Whatever he is not that. You would stake his life and ours on a man who spared spiders," Aldous said. "I would stake it on the fact that I have spent my days watching people who were sure no one was watching them," Lynette said. "It is the only expert thing about me." "You bet your grandchildren wrong, doctor. Let me bet this right." Lazaro's hand found her wrist as she rose. He could not say much. He did not need to. He looked at her, this man who had commanded armies, with a glance, and he spent the last of his voice on 3 words that plainly cost him everything to say. "Be careful, please. And then, fighting for each one, come back." Lynette looked down at the most feared man in the city, reduced to asking a housemaid not to leave him alone in the dark, and felt the whole strange shape of the night settle into something she had no name for. For 7 years she had wanted, more than she had ever let herself know, to matter to one single person in this world. She had gotten her wish in the worst possible way, in a cold room, with the clock running out. "I always come back," she told him. "Ask the floors. I have been coming back to this house every morning for 7 years." She was already moving. She slipped out the stillroom door in her gray uniform with a bucket in her hand, the most invisible object in the Vale house, and she went to find the one man in it she believed still had a soul, while somewhere above her the clocks ground toward noon, and a woman in mourning silk practiced her grief in a mirror, and a dead man lay in a cold room. For the first time in his life, how to wait on someone else to save him. Marek did not raise the alarm. Lynette found him at the foot of the main stair, standing a false honor guard over a master he had been told was dead, and she did the only thing she had ever known how to do with the truth, which was to hand it over plainly and let it do its own work. She told him Lazaro was alive. She told him Renzo had done it. She watched the big man's face the way she watched every face, and she saw the exact moment. The grief cracked open into something older and harder, and she knew before he said a word that she had bet right. He wept this time too, but only for a moment. And then Merrick of the gentle hands went very still and very cold, and asked her one question: "Where is he?" And when she told him, he did a thing that undid her a little. He took the bucket out of her hands, gently, the way he lifted spiders, and he said, "You have carried enough, show me." By the time the families arrived, the board had quietly turned over, and not one of the cold new men in the courtyard knew it. They gathered at noon in the long gallery, the capos and the allies, and the heads of the smaller houses, summoned to pay their respects to the dead and to hear from the grieving bride and the loyal right hand how the world would be arranged now. Ondine stood at the head of the room in flawless gray, her softness practiced to perfection. A single tear held ready at the corner of one eye like a jewel she could drop on cue. There was a closed casket beside her, brought in that morning, that everyone believed held Lazaro Vale. It held sandbags and a folded flag. Renzo, she told the room when the clock struck and he did not appear, was overcome, and would join them shortly. She began to speak of continuity, of steady hands in a hard time, of the wisdom of joining two great houses under one roof at last she was building, word by lovely word, to the moment she would ask them all to kneel to her, when the doors at the far end of the gallery opened, and a dead man walked in. He came slowly. He came leaning with his whole weight on the arm of a large woman in a maid's gray uniform, and on his other side walked old Dr. Aldous, and behind them came Merrick and a dozen guards whose faces the room knew and trusted, and the sound that went through that gathering was not a scream, but something worse, a great, indrawn silence. 40 powerful people forgetting all at once how to breathe. For a moment, no one in that gallery moved, because the mind refuses a thing like that. They had seen the casket. They had heard the bride. Half of them had already begun, in the private backrooms of their own ambition, to redraw the map of the city around a Vale who was gone. And now the Vale, who was gone, was walking toward them under his own ruined power, gray as ash, held upright by a woman none of them could place. And the story they had all quietly agreed to believe came apart in their hands. Lynette felt it happen. She had spent her life reading rooms, and she read this one turn in a heartbeat, felt the whole tide of it swing away from the beautiful woman in gray and toward the dying man on her own arm, and she thought, with a cold, clean satisfaction that surprised her, there. Now they see him. Now they all finally see. Lazaro Vale was gray and gaunt, and could barely hold his own head up, but he held it up. He crossed the length of his own gallery, one dragging step at a time, refusing to be carried, refusing to fall, until he stood before the closed casket that bore his name and the woman who had ordered it, and the whole terrible weight of his survival filled the room like a held note. Ondine, he said, his voice was a ruin. It carried. Anyway. My love, you look surprised. She recovered fast. Lynette had to give her that. The tear vanished, the softness reset, and she reached for the only weapon she had left, which was the story. He is not well, she said to the room, her voice climbing. Look at him. He is out of his mind with fever. He has been missing all night, and God knows what he has taken. Someone help him. He does not know what he is saying. He knows exactly what he is saying, Aldous said, and stepped forward, and the old doctor, who had signed the false certificate 8 hours before, now unsigned it in front of every power in the city. He told them about the poison. He named it. He told them how a little each day had thinned a strong man to a shadow, while a devoted bride checked the flowers, and how the last of it had been meant to look like a heart giving out at a happy table. He held up a glass with a residue dried in the bottom of it, and he told them what they would find in it, and he told them who had put it there. Ondine tried to laugh. It came out wrong. She turned to her own people, the men who had come with her father's blessing, and found them studying their own shoes. She turned to the capos she had been moments from ruling, and found 40 faces of stone. Lies, she said, and the word cracked down the middle. It is the raving of a sick man, and a bought old fool, and here she cast about for what Lynette even was, and could not find a word large enough for her contempt. Who in this room will take the word of a servant? And when the room turned, as rooms do, hungry now, toward the woman in gray, it was not the doctor's testimony that finished her, it was the maid's. Because Lynette stepped out from under Lazaro's arm, once she was sure he could stand a moment without her, and she faced the most dangerous people in the city, and she was not afraid, because the worst thing that could happen in a room had already happened to her in a cold one, and she had held the line against it all night long. She did not raise her voice. She simply told them what she had seen, not guessed. Seen. There was not a room in that house she had not been inside, not a corner she had not cleaned. She was the one person Ondine and Renzo had never once thought to lower their voices around, because she was furniture, because she was invisible, because a woman built like her did not count. She told them about the rehearsals in the mirror. She told them about the new men and the changed locks. She told them, word for word, the calm sentence she had heard through a half-open door. No one questions a heart. And she told them the thing that turned the last stomach in that room. The thing she alone had carried up out of the dark. That Lazaro had not been unconscious at all. That the poison had left him awake inside his own dead body. That this woman had stood over a man who could hear every word and mourned him with a borrowed tear so that she could take his house. She looked at Ondine while she said it, and she did not look away, and she let the woman see, for the first time and the last, exactly who had been standing in the corner of every room she had ever thought was empty. You practiced your grief in the blue hall mirror, Lynette said quietly, yesterday morning, 3 times over, until the tear fell on the right word. I was on my knees behind you, with a cloth in my hand, and you stepped over me to get a better angle at your own face. You never once felt me there. That was your whole mistake in the end. You built your murder in front of the only person in this house who was always, always watching. The families were old, and they were hard, and they lived by a code that had very little softness in it. But there was one line even they did not cross, and it was this one. You did not do that to your own. You did not poison the man whose bread you ate and leave him awake to feel it. Ondine looked around the gallery for one face that would meet her eyes, and found none. Lazaro did not touch her. That was the thing Lynette would remember. He did not raise a hand, did not raise his voice, did not so much as step toward her. He simply looked at the assembled heads of the families and said, in his ruined whisper, that the whole silent room bent to hear, she and Renzo are yours to judge, by our law. In the old way, I want no part of them. Take them out of my house. And the families, who had come to kneel to Ondine, closed around her instead, and what happened to her and to the man bound in the cold still room happened away from that room and away from Lynette's eyes, in the old way. And it was final, and it was not spoken of again. When it was over, Lazaro turned and swayed, and Lynette was there before he could fall, sliding back under his arm as though she had never left it. The whole room saw her do it. The whole room saw the most feared man in the city put his weight, without hesitation and without shame, on the maid nobody had ever bothered to name. Take me out of here, he breathed against her hair, please. I have been strong in front of these people for the last time today. He held on until the last door closed behind them. Then, in the quiet of a small side room, with only Aldous and Marek to see, the thing that had kept Lazaro Vale upright for one impossible hour finally ran dry, and he went down, and this time it was Lynette who caught him. She lowered him into a deep chair by a cold hearth and dropped to her knees in front of him, out of pure habit, and her hands were already moving, already checking the count at his throat, the color of his lips, and the temperature of the fingers she chafed between her palms. Aldous hovered with his bag. Marek built a fire with those careful hands, and for a while the 4 of them simply breathed in a warm room, alive, which an hour ago had not been a thing any of them could have promised. It struck her, kneeling there, how the whole world had turned itself over in the space of one night. Yesterday, she would have been sent out of this room for so much as entering it. Yesterday, this man had been a distant thunder she cleaned up after, a set of habits and preferences, his coffee scalding and unsweetened, a holster he never once took off, even inside his own house. Now she knew the exact rhythm of his heart because she had counted it back from the edge of nothing with her own 2 fingers, and he was letting her check him over like a fussing mother. Submitting to it, this man who submitted to no one, watching her work with an expression she could not read and did not dare to name. She told herself it was only gratitude. Gratitude fades, She had been grateful to plenty of people in her life who had forgotten her by morning. She would not make the mistake of hoping for more than a house like this had ever once given a woman like her. But Lynette felt the change come into the room, the way she felt weather. The crisis was over. And with the crisis over, she was, once again, a maid kneeling on a fine carpet in a house that was not hers, holding the hand of a man so far above her that the distance had no bottom. She felt the old invisibility rise up around her like water, familiar, almost a comfort, and she began, without quite deciding to withdraw. She set his hand down gently on the arm of the chair, got to her feet, and smoothed her ruined apron. Then she said, in the flat, serviceable voice she had used in this house for 7 years, "I will have someone bring broth and clean linen for the doctor, and I should see to the gallery. There will be a great deal to put right." And she was already turning for the door, already folding herself back down into the shape the house had cut for her, when his voice stopped her. Lynette. Just that, her name. The third time in 7 years. And this time his eyes were open and clear and fixed on her, and there was nothing slack or dying in them at all. "Where are you going?" he said. "To work," she said. "Sir," the "sir" came out of her from old reflex, and she hated it the moment it left her mouth. "It is what I do. It is what I am for." "No," he said. He pushed himself up in the chair, waving off Aldous, and he looked at her with the whole force of a man who had spent a night learning exactly how much he had failed to see. "You are not going back out there to scrub my floors while I sit by a fire. Do you understand what you did? Do you have the smallest idea? I have 300 men whose only job in this life is to keep me breathing, and every one of them stepped over my body and went home. And a woman I never bothered to look at carried me out of a room on her back and lay down on a stone floor and breathed into my mouth and counted my heart through the dark with her own 2 hands until I remembered how to do it myself." He stopped. His ruined voice cracked all the way through. "No one has ever done anything for me in my life that they were not paid to do, until you, and you were paid the least of anyone in this house." He said it like an accusation, and it was aimed at himself. 7 years, he said. 7 years you were under my roof, and I paid you a wage that would not keep a dog, and I called you by another woman's name on the rare days I called you anything at all, and you repaid me by being the one living soul who would not let me die. Do you understand what that does to a man like me? It takes everything I believed about my own life, and it turns it over. It makes me look back down the whole length of it and count up all the people I stepped past without a glance, the way 300 of my own men stepped past me last night. I did not do it to be seen," she said, and found that her own voice was shaking now. "I did it because I could not stand in that hallway and let it happen. That is not the same as wanting anything from you. I do not want anything from you." "I know," he said. "That is exactly why I cannot let you walk back out that door as though you were nothing." He held out his hand, the hand she had held all night, when it was cold and dead, and it was warm now, warm because she had made it so, and he turned it palm up in a way that asked instead of ordered, which she suspected he had never once done in his life. "All night you held on to me," he said. "Let me hold on to you for a minute. Just a minute. I find I am not as strong as I pretended in there, and there is only one person in this house I am willing to be weak in front of." And Lynette, who had not been touched by another living soul since the night her mother died, who had confessed that very thing to a man she believed could not hear her, stood frozen in the doorway of a fine room, and understood that he had heard that too. She crossed the room. She did not know how to do anything else with a hand held out to her, like that, having wanted one for so long. She sat on a low stool beside his chair, and she put her hand in his, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the fire cracked, and Merrick quietly took Aldous by the elbow and steered the old doctor out, and the door clicked shut, and they were alone. "There will be talk," she said at last, "because someone had to say the practical thing, and it was always her. A man like you, a woman like me, they will say things. I am not saying it to be talked out of anything," she added, before he could speak. I have cleaned this house for 7 years. I know exactly what your world costs, and I knew the price of it when I knelt down beside you. If I were the kind of woman who scared easy, Mr. Vale, I would have walked out that gate at midnight and left you for the undertaker. I am only telling you the shape of the thing, because someone in this house has always had to. And it seems the job is still mine. Let them, Lazaro said. He was looking at her the way she had spent years making sure no one ever looked at her, and to her own astonishment she found she did not want to hide from it. They will say the great Lazaro Vale owes his life to his housemaid, he said, and they will be right. I have spent my whole life terrified of owing anyone anything, and it turns out the only debt I have ever been glad of is this one. You do not owe me, she started. I know I do not, he said. That is not what this is. He turned her hand over in his, studying it. The reddened knuckles, the strong blunt fingers, the hands that had scrubbed his floors and moved his weight and pulled him back from the floor of the world. When my father died, he said, I came down to the kitchen at 4 in the morning because I could not stand to be in a house full of people telling me they were sorry. And there was one person awake, scrubbing a pot that was already clean, and she did not tell me she was sorry. She did not tell me anything. She just moved over and made room at the sink and let me stand there. I have thought about that night more times than you could know. I never understood why. I think I understand now. You are the only person who ever gave me something without first working out what it would cost me. There is a thing you said to me in the dark, he went on. When you were sure I could not hear it, you said the furniture stayed. You meant it bitterly, I think, against yourself, against all the years they spent looking straight through you. But I have not been able to stop hearing it since. The whole house emptied of everyone who mattered, you said, and the furniture stayed. He shook his head slowly. They were not the ones who mattered, Lynette. That is the thing not one of us saw until you proved it on a stone floor, with your arms around a dead man. The people I called important walked out my door and left me to the smoke. The person I called furniture breathed my own life back into me. I have spent all this time valuing exactly the wrong things. You are the correction to every account I ever kept. Lynette's throat had closed. She remembered that night. She had turned it over for years like a stone in her pocket, his voice saying, "Thank you, Lynette," and she had never once imagined he had done the same. "I do not know how to keep you," he said. "That is the honest truth. I have never kept anything I did not first pay for or take, but I know I am not letting you go back to being a shape in the corner of my house. You will not be my maid." He saw her flinch and he shook his head. "Not because there is anything low in the work, because you were meant for more than a mop, and this house owes you the more it kept you from. You sat those nursing papers twice. You will sit them again, and you will pass them a third time, and this time, nothing on this earth will take that money from you. And if you still want to spend your days pulling people back from the dark, then God help me, you will be the best there ever was, because I have felt your hands do it, and I am the proof." She was crying now and not bothering to hide it. "And you," she managed, "what do you get?" "I get to be seen by the one person who was looking the whole time," he said. "Everyone in my life has watched me the way you watch a fire you are afraid of. You are the only one who ever watched me the way you watch someone you are afraid of losing." He lifted her hand, the strong, plain hand that had saved him, and he pressed his mouth to the reddened knuckles, slow and lingering, and absolutely certain. "All night," he said against her skin, "you told me you were not going anywhere." He looked up at her. "Now it is my turn to say it. I am not going anywhere, Lynette. Not from you. Let the whole city talk itself hoarse." It was not a fairy tale. She knew that even then, even with her heart going like a bird against her ribs, he was a hard man in a hard world, and there would be blood on this house again some day, and she would have to learn to live beside it. But she had been told all her life, in 1,000 small daily ways, that a woman built like her, quiet like her, poor like her, was something to be stepped around and never something to be chosen. And here was a man, The whole city stepped carefully around. Who could have had any polished creature he pointed at, holding her plain red hand to his mouth by a fire, and choosing her, not despite the softness the world had mocked. Because of it. Because that softness had been the only warm thing in a cold house, and it had kept the last ember of him alight through the longest night either of them would ever live. No one had ever once, in all her life, called her softness a good thing. It had been a flaw to be hidden, a weight to apologize for, and a reason to make herself smaller in doorways and quieter in crowded rooms. And now the hardest man she had ever known was telling her, with his mouth against her knuckles and his life still in her hands, that the very thing the world had spent its time punishing her for was the thing that had kept him in it. She did not know yet what to do with that. She suspected she might spend a long and happy time learning. Okay, she whispered. It was the same small word she had whispered to a dead man on a cold floor a lifetime ago. And it meant the same thing now that it had meant then. I am here. I am not going anywhere. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He drew her up out of the low stool and into the deep chair beside him, and for the first time in more years than she could count, Lynette let herself be held by someone who had chosen to do it, and she did not once feel invisible. And outside the tall windows the low gray sky finally broke open into a hard clean winter light, the kind that hides nothing and shows a thing exactly for what it is. They had all given up on him. The finest doctors in the city looked at Lazaro Vale, drew the sheet to his chin, and walked away. Only the woman, no one had ever bothered to name, knelt down in the dark and refused to let go, and counted a great man's heart back into the world, with nothing but her warmth and her stubbornness. The quiet ones, the soft ones, the ones the world steps around, like furniture, are so often the ones holding everything together in the dark, while nobody watches. If this story moved you, tap that like button, subscribe for more stories like it, and tell me in the comments the moment that gave you chills. Was it the hand in the dark, or the dead man walking through those doors? I read every single one. I will see you in the next story.